Джеф Спек – архитектор, урбанист, городской планировщик и писатель. Выпускник Гарвардского университета, бывший директор по дизайну Национального фонда искусств США, основатель Института социального проектирования и лидер направления «Новый урбанизм». Автор популярных выступлений на конференции TED и фундаментальных книг «Нация пригородов» и «Город для пешехода».
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Well, I'm very grateful to the city and state of Saratov for having me here. I'm very grateful to Strelka for bringing me to Russia for the first time. I am American. I'm told that I look American. My hosts at Strelka say I look very American. But the joke is on them because I'm 7/8 Russian. 7 of my 8 great-grandparents were from Russia, so I'm very happy to be back, and thanks to you all for bringing me here. My specialty is the walkable city. Here's the name of my lecture. I give talks, and my talks are available on TED, and I give talks about why the walkable city is so important, and I give talks about how to make your city more walkable. And I understand that walkable doesn't exactly translate into Russia. The walkable city is not just about walking. It's about making a city in which people want to be and spend their time. It's also about making a city in which the automobile is an instrument of freedom, but not a necessary prosthetic device, like a false limb that you need to live your lives. I'm also an urban designer. I design new places. I design some very beautiful and expensive new places like Rosemary Beach in Florida. And I design some beautiful and not so expensive new places. If you look in the foreground, you'll see an addition to the town of Hülebrug in Belgium. And this is affordable housing. This is worker housing in Belgium. And I should say I did these projects with my old firm DPZ from Miami. DPZ is represented here today by Dwayne Phillips, who will be speaking to you later today. So my hosts pointed me to Saratov, and they pointed me to certain areas in Saratov and said, this is how we're building now, and we want your help. And I look at these places, and I'm not going to talk about the pipes in the street so much, because I can't help you with that. But I look at these places, it's so different from my experience, and I have the question, how can I help? What can I offer you? And I thought a lot about that, and I think there are 4 things that I can offer you today. I want to talk to you, remind you, convince you why place, the quality of place, is so important. I want to encourage you to look locally for solutions. I want to talk about what those solutions might be, what the key criteria are that I believe you should be applying to your future housing. And then I want to end talking about some of the experience we've had in America, what I call an auto nation, a driving country. So that's the organization of my talk today. Let's start about why place is so important. The experience of being a city planner in the US has been a very interesting one in not getting that much attention for the arguments that we were making, but then noticing that these other 3 professional groups were making the same arguments and getting much more attention. And they were the economists, the environmentalists, and the epidemiologists, all arguing for the same things, but in their own terms, and they've changed the discussion in the United States. The economic argument right now, it's very clear. Cities produce more wealth than other places, and walkable cities statistically are shown to produce greater wealth than less walkable cities. Now, that's the good news. People are moving back, corporations are moving back to city centers. We are becoming less suburban and more urban. But there's bad news too, economically. This is probably what you think of when you think of America. And if you haven't been around much of America, this may be what you think America is. But most of America actually looks like this. And these are places that, in addition to being, heartbreakingly ugly, are also negative economic engines. They cost more than they generate in wealth. And we've learned in the US that this is a bad model, and we're turning away from that model. What we've done in the last 50 years is build more and more and more roads for driving. In 1970, well, let's just say, in 2010, we have twice as many roads in our country as we had in 1970. And we've gone from spending 1 out of every $10 we earn on transportation to spending 2 out of every $10 we earn on transportation. Working class people are spending 3 out of every $10 on transportation. And the poor are spending 40% of their income on transportation because we've created an environment in which they must drive everywhere, and everyone must have their own automobile. And when you're not rich, that's a tremendous burden to place on people. That's part of the economic argument. The environmental argument, of course, is climate change. Each of us as individuals, the way that we contribute most to carbon in the atmosphere is by driving. And so the environmental message, which has become very powerful in the US, if not with our leaders, at least with our citizens, has been about driving less. And of course, this environment often doesn't allow us to drive less. And then finally, the epidemiologists, the doctors, are saying, why do we have the first generation of Americans who are expected to live shorter lives than their parents? 1/3 of all children born after the year 2000 are expected to become diabetic. Diet is part of it, but a big part of it is the fact that we have engineered out of existence in our community the useful walk. Walking no longer serves a purpose. When you have a gym, a fitness center, and you drive to the parking lot to park, to take the escalator to the treadmill so you can walk, you have an unhealthy society. And that's been a very powerful argument. We've tripled the amount of asthma since 1990, and most of it's from car exhaust. And of course, we have all the deaths. This is 40,000 deaths per year just last year in driving. And that's been a real epidemic in our country. So those are the three arguments that we've been hearing a lot in the US. But when I look at the condition here, I'm reminded of a quote by our ally, Winston Churchill, who said, "We shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us." And I think we need to remember that when we're making places in our cities. We have a responsibility to create environments that will make us better people and happy people. And in fact, we've done that better, and we've done it here. And what we need to know is here. So that gets to my second point, which is to look locally. You've brought me here from America. You don't need, in dealing with these issues, you actually don't need to look to America. You don't need to look to Europe. You don't need even to look to Moscow. From what I've seen, especially in the time I spent walking around yesterday, it's very clear to me that the lessons you need to learn in order to do your housing better in Saratov and in other similar Russian cities are all located here, particularly in your older urban fabric. So what are those lessons? And if you remember nothing else from my talk today, I want to share with you what I think are the 4 key criteria that you need to understand as you move forward with more housing. The first of those is mixed use and transit, public transit, mass transit. The second is small blocks and streets. It's a design rule. The third is perimeter block buildings, which I'll explain. And the fourth is sidewalks and trees, because they're so simple yet they're forgotten. Mixed use and transit. This is how we organized the US for 50, 60 years. Most of our land use maps look like this: large areas of single use. That was the rule for very long. This is what they used to teach in the planning schools. They don't teach that anymore because we realize that when everything is separated from everything else, housing from shopping, from offices, and connected only with, then you don't have a walkable society. And we now realize that this is the model that makes for a walkable, healthy, green community. You probably recognize Manhattan. And look at the size of the dots of land use. Conventional suburban automotive zoning versus the confetti-like, fine-grained zoning that makes things that are useful to you close to you. And that's the big lesson. If you want to make a walkable, healthy community, you must mix your uses very tightly. And then in terms of transit, well, yes, our subways, like your amazing subways in Moscow, they actually, it's an issue of geometry. However wide you make your roads, the fact is that a subway carries as many people per hour as 2,000 cars. And a bus carries as many people per hour as more than 100 cars. And mobility is wealth. The more people you can move, the most efficiently, the wealthier a society you will have. So if you want to invest in your future wealth, you need to invest in mass transportation, and you have some here. Most American cities ripped out their streetcars in the middle of the 20th century, and we really regret it. We're rebuilding them now at great expense, and you still have them, and you need to keep them, and you need to invest in them. Second, small blocks and streets. The best urban places, this is Barcelona, the best places for walking, and can I say the best places for living, have small blocks. When you have small blocks, you can have small streets. And small streets are much more walkable, much more comfortable. This is the best part, or part of the best part of Saratov, and you can see the children's park there and the surrounding neighborhood. Now, Russian blocks are a little bit bigger than most European blocks, but they're still, in your historic areas, they're still nice and small. And it's these smaller blocks that have the smaller streets that are very comfortable for walking around. It's really an important lesson. Third, a little bit sophisticated, this discussion, is perimeter blocks and buildings. These are buildings that hold the edge of the block. You want the building to fill the block and to line the street. The architects in the audience will recognize the most famous diagram in the history of planning. This is Le Corbusier's Plan Voisin, the towers in the park from the early 20th century. And you can see these buildings, these cross-shaped buildings, floating freely in the landscape. And that became the model for so much planning, particularly in Europe and particularly in the Eastern Bloc. This is what it looked like. This is what he wanted to do to Paris. You know, he was going to destroy the best part of Paris and put that there. And we did it in the US, but we didn't do it a lot. We did it mostly for people who had no choice, lower income housing. Most of those projects failed and had to be destroyed. But if you look at the Soviet bloc, it's the normal way to build. Towers floating in the landscape. They failed to make space because they failed to define space. They do not make good edges, so you don't feel enclosed. If you look at this part north of here, you can see to the south is the perimeter block buildings that hold the edge of the street. To the north is the point towers. And the space that these buildings make is unsatisfying and uncomfortable. It's not like being in an outdoor living room because the space is not shaped. A plaza is only as good as its walls. A public space is only as good as its edges. We actually are only comfortable in spaces that have good edges. And it's for that reason that, and by the way, we've been talking about this for a long time. What's the right ratio of height to width? But the main point to remember is, if you don't pull the buildings out to the street and line the edge of the street, it's not a comfortable street. And your best places, like all over the world, the places you want to be are the places that shape space. And point towers don't do it. Now, what's interesting is you look at your new development here that I was pointed to see, and from the air, this looks fantastic. It's holding the edge of the blocks and theoretically creating very good streets. And in fact, spatially, the outcome is quite satisfactory. Yet, this is not an attractive image, and the question is why? The architecture could be better. I'll let other people talk about the buildings. My job is the space. But what's missing here? And that gets to point 4, which is where are the proper sidewalks and where are the proper trees? We've learned through, thousands of years of development that the most walkable streets have sidewalks near the buildings and trees ideally between the sidewalk and the street to protect you from the cars. and that's the traditional, proper way to do a sidewalk. And you see it throughout your downtown in Saratov. And if this scene had the sidewalk where it belonged and the trees where it belonged, it would actually be a pretty livable, walkable street. And also the trees hide the buildings. Frank Lloyd Wright said, someone asked Frank Lloyd Wright, what's your advice to a young architect? And he said, plant lots of trees. But if you do bad buildings, you can hide them with trees. This is an ugly building in America, but you don't know it because we planted trees. And trees do so much for the environment, as well as for making a street comfortable and attractive. And of course, your best streets, here's a drone photo of your walking street before dawn. Your best streets have your best trees. So that's it. These are the 4 points. I want you to remember these. We can get much more complicated and sophisticated, but if you do these 4 things, you'll be in much better shape than you are now. Finally, I want to end with a few last messages from America, since I don't know when I'll be back. You're experiencing now, and you have been experiencing since the 90s, what we've been experiencing since the 20s and the 30s, which is mass consumption of automobiles. You know, in the 1920s in the US, it became normal for a working class person to own an automobile, and we celebrated it, and we fell in love with the automobile, and we had this honeymoon that lasted for a while. But it stopped being a honeymoon when we started organizing our whole landscape around the automobile. And we made places where you only live, and we separated them from the places where you only work, and we separated them from the places where you only shop, and we separated them with highways, because the more you separate things, the more you need lanes of highways to connect them back together. And we had to keep widening our streets and widening our highways bigger and bigger until we spend all our money and all our time driving in these environments, which get fatter and never satisfy demand, because driving is just so easy, right? So it's no fun. Driving can become a drag, and in these environments, walking can be even worse. So it's also very stressful on families. This says position open. Divorce is much higher in our suburban automotive areas than in our urban walkable areas because of the stress that the long commutes place on our families. And this has become the model again. When I was young, 1 out of 12 19-year-old people decided not to get a driver's license. Now it's 1 out of 4. The trends in America are back to the city. It's happening throughout America, South America, Europe. And this is a quote I think that's very relevant to you. This is Enrique Peñalosa. He's now mayor again of Bogota. And he says, the true sign of a developed nation isn't that the poor people have cars, it's that the rich are taking transit. So I know that the automobile is exciting. I know that for many people, it's their first chance to own a great new car. But we've had that experience. We've moved beyond it. And in most of Europe and in most of the US, the model used to be centered all around the car. But now we understand that a healthy city, a walkable city, mixes all the different modes of transportation. And I haven't mentioned it, but cycling is super important. In Copenhagen, 6 times as many people bike to work as drive to work. 6 times. And they plow the bike lanes before they plow the streets because it serves more people. And as we like to say, there's no such thing as bad weather when you're biking, just bad clothing. If you have the right clothes, and they don't look very happy, but they bike year-round in Helsinki. So everything you need is right here at your doorstep. It's right outside this door. I think if you embrace the best urbanism that you already have in your cities, you will be grateful in the future, and you'll have a lot here to celebrate in Saratov and in Russia. Thank you so much for your attention.